Tonight, let us drift together into stories far older than the world we know today. Beyond deserts that shimmer endlessly, along the mighty Nile, where incense lingers in the warm air, and where colossal temples glowed under the first light of dawn. This is not simply the account of rulers and monuments. It is the chronicle of a people who filled their lives with gods, deities of the river, of the wide sky, of the fertile earth, and of the hidden realms awaiting beyond death. In these narratives, you will hear tales of creation and of destruction, of falcons soaring and jackals prowling, of thrones seized and reclaimed. For the ancient Egyptians, these were not mere inventions. They were the very breath of their civilization. Each harvest, every offering, and every whispered prayer was interwoven with myth. Their entire understanding of life and death was bound to the divine. If this slower rhythm of storytelling offers you calm, you may treat it as an invitation to rest. Allow yourself to sink into the cadence of the words, to imagine a world lit by oil lamps and guarded by timeless statues. Perhaps you will close your eyes as the stories carry you, or keep them open and picture images formed by firelight flickering on carved stone. Across the ancient land, mythology was not only a matter of worship, but also of daily order. It governed the cycle of the sun, the swelling of the river, and the fertility of the soil. It explained why the seasons shifted, why the stars turned overhead, and why rulers were to be obeyed as divine figures. For a people who lived on the edge of desert and floodplain, the myths were an anchor of stability and reassurance. The Egyptian pantheon was immense and varied, and yet deeply structured. The sky itself was not a void, but a goddess, Nut, whose body stretched protectively over the world. Beneath her lay Geb, the god of the earth, solid and enduring. The air between them was Shu, who held sky and earth apart, giving space for creation. Out of the limitless dark waters of Nun arose Atum, the first god, self-formed, who began the unfolding of existence. From Atum came Shu and Tefnut, representing air and moisture, who in turn gave rise to Geb and Nut. Their children, Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys, would dominate the divine dramas of Egypt, embodying love and betrayal, death and rebirth, chaos and order. These deities formed what was known as the Ennead of Heliopolis, the sacred family through which the Egyptians explained the rising of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, and the balance of harmony against disorder. To the Egyptians, creation was not imagined as a single event, but as an eternal rhythm. Each dawn was proof that life was being renewed, that the sun, God Ra, had once more triumphed in his journey. By day he rode the sky in his solar bark, his golden vessel. By night he traversed the perilous underworld, where serpents, spirits, and hidden gates awaited. Chief among his enemies was the immense serpent Apophis, whose endless coils threatened to swallow light and plunge the world into chaos. Every morning, when sunlight broke over the horizon, it was believed Ra had prevailed again. Yet victory was never certain. It had to be won daily, aided by the prayers and rituals of the living. Temples were oriented toward the sun's path, priests sang hymns at dawn, and ordinary people trusted that their devotion helped sustain the cosmic struggle. In Ra's endless journey, Egyptians saw both fragility and endurance. Even the mightiest god required assistance, just as pharaohs needed loyal subjects and families needed each other. Human action prayers, offerings, hymns was believed to reinforce divine strength. In this way, the line between human and divine blurred, each depending upon the other. Among the most beloved of the gods was Osiris, lord of fertility, vegetation, and the underworld. He was imagined as green-skinned, clad in white, holding the crook and flail, ancient symbols of kingship. Osiris ruled with Isis, his devoted sister and consort, and together they represented love, abundance, and the promise of renewal. But their brother Seth, god of storms, deserts, and violence, was consumed by jealousy and rage. In the most famous of Egyptian myths, Seth plotted against Osiris. He crafted a magnificent chest, measured precisely to Osiris's form, and at a feast offered it as a gift to anyone who could fit within it. When Osiris lay down inside, Seth slammed the lid shut, sealed it with molten lead, and cast it into the Nile. The river bore Osiris away, leaving Egypt in mourning. Isis, embodying loyalty and determination, wandered across the land, searching for her husband. In some versions of the tale, Seth found the chest and tore Osiris's body into pieces, scattering them across Egypt. Isis, aided by her sister Nephthys and the jackal-headed Anubis, gathered the fragments and restored Osiris with her magic. Though Osiris could not return to life among the living, he was resurrected as king of the underworld, presiding with justice over the souls of the dead. From their union came Horus, the falcon-headed god, destined to avenge his father and reclaim order from Seth's chaos. The struggle between Horus and Seth was long and filled with contests. It was not a single battle, but a drawn-out series of trials, legal judgments, and symbolic struggles. Horus was young, but guided by Isis's wisdom. Seth was cunning, brutal, and deceitful. At times Horus seemed defeated, losing an eye in one account, but he was restored by Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. The healed eye, known as the Eye of Horus, became a powerful symbol of protection, healing, and completeness. Ultimately, Horus triumphed. The Council of Gods declared him the rightful heir to Osiris. Seth was subdued, though never fully destroyed, for chaos could not be eliminated entirely. Instead, it remained ever present, checked but never banished. In this story, Egyptians found the foundation of kingship itself. Every pharaoh was seen as Horus incarnate, the living god who maintained the balance of truth, justice, and harmony against the encroaching tide of disorder. For the people, these myths were not just entertainment, but guiding truths. They explained the natural cycles, justified political authority, and provided hope in the face of death. And death was always near. In Egypt, the afterlife was central to belief. Tombs, however modest, were prepared with care. Goods, food, amulets, and texts accompanied the deceased, easing their journey through Duat, the realm of the dead. The soul's passage was perilous, filled with gates and guardians. Spells from the Book of the Dead were inscribed on tomb walls or written on papyrus scrolls, serving as guides and charms. At the culmination of the journey stood the Hall of Ma'at, where the soul was judged before Osiris and 42 divine assessors. The heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth. If found heavy with sin, the heart was devoured by Ammit, the fearsome creature with crocodile jaws, a lion's body, and hippopotamus haunches. If balanced, the soul entered the field of reeds, an eternal paradise where families reunited, crops flourished, and the Nile's waters never failed. Temples in Egypt were not simply houses of prayer. They were cosmic machines designed to maintain balance between the divine and mortal worlds. Their architecture mirrored the universe itself. The massive pylons at the entrance symbolized the horizon, the moment where the sun rose. Beyond them, open courtyards represented the earthly realm, accessible to the public. Further inward, the hypostyle halls filled with towering lotus and papyrus-shaped columns reflected the primeval marshes where creation began. At the very heart, the sanctuary was the hidden womb of creation itself, the chamber where the statue of the god dwelled. Priests cared for the deity daily, not as ritual alone, but as necessity. Each morning they awakened the statue with hymns, cleansed it, dressed it in fine linen, and offered food and incense. In these acts, the gods were sustained, and in turn, Egypt was sustained. The common people could not enter the sanctuary, but they participated through festivals, processions, and offerings. On holy days, the divine image was brought forth, paraded through the streets, placed upon gilded barks that floated along the Nile. Music and chanting filled the air, uniting the living with the gods. Among the deities most closely tied to death and rebirth was Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian. Anubis presided over mummification, ensuring bodies were preserved so that the soul might recognize its vessel in eternity. Priests wearing jackal masks enacted his role, wrapping the dead in linen, anointing them with oils, and reciting sacred words. To the Egyptians, the black color associated with Anubis symbolized fertility, rebirth, and the rich soil left by the Nile's floods. He was not feared, but revered, a compassionate guide ensuring fairness at the scales of judgment, standing watch as hearts were weighed against Mahat's feather. Another beloved figure was Hathor, goddess of joy, love, and motherhood. Depicted with cow's ears or crowned with horns cradling the solar disk, she embodied both maternal gentleness and celestial radiance. Her temples resounded with music. Sistrums rattled, drums echoed, dancers swayed. She was patroness of mothers and infants, invoked for safe childbirth and abundant milk. She was also guardian of travelers, extending her reach into the desert's vastness. In her presence, sorrow turned to laughter and loneliness to comfort. To honor Hathor was to embrace the sweetness of life, linking divinity not only to temples, but also to feasts, songs, and the tenderness between parent and child. Wisdom and knowledge were personified in Thoth, ibis-headed master of writing. With palette and reed pen, he recorded laws, rituals, and the outcome of divine judgments. Thoth was said to have invented hieroglyphs, gifting humanity the power of communication with gods and eternity itself. Writing was not seen as mundane. It was hika, magic, shaping reality. Priests invoked Thoth for accuracy, scribes for eloquence, astronomers for guidance in measuring time. He maintained the rhythm of the moon, balancing calendars and rituals. In myths, he acted as mediator, calming quarrels among the gods and ensuring truth prevailed. At the judgment of souls, it was Thoth who meticulously recorded the scale's results, his impartiality ensuring cosmic justice. If Thoth was the embodiment of reason, Sekhmet was the incarnation of fury and fire. Lion-headed and born from the eye of Ra, she was unleashed to punish rebellion among humans. Her wrath scorched the desert. Her breath burned armies. Yet Sekhmet was not only destruction, she was also healing. Her priests were physicians, channeling her fierce energy into medicine, incantations, and cures. Festivals sought to pacify her temper with music, laughter, and rivers of beer dyed red to resemble blood. In drunken joy, her rage dissolved into protection. Sekhmet embodied duality. The same force that ravaged also restored. The same lioness that clawed could shield. Balancing her was Bastet, the cat-headed goddess of tenderness and home. Where Sekhmet embodied ferocity, Bastet offered warmth. In houses across Egypt, cats were cherished as her sacred creatures, protectors against vermin and carriers of divine grace. Temples to Bastet were filled with bronze cat figurines, offerings of devotion. Families believed her presence brought joy and safety. Yet Bastet, too, carried hidden strength. For cats, though gentle, could strike with precision. She was proof that nurturing and defense were not opposites, but complements. The Nile itself was deified as Hapi, the god of flood and fertility. Each year, its inundation transformed arid land into fertile fields. Hymns praised Hapi as the sustainer of life, the one who brought grain, fish, and abundance. He was depicted as a plump, androgynous figure, symbolizing nourishment. His return each year was a festival of joy, celebrated with offerings and gratitude. Farmers timed their planting to his rhythm, trusting his waters as surely as they trusted the rising sun. Without Hapi, no crops would grow, no people would thrive. In honoring him, Egyptians honored the very rhythm of survival. At the center of all belief was Ma'at, both goddess and principle. She was truth, justice, balance, and order. Her image, a woman with an ostrich feather on her head, symbolized harmony itself. Without Ma'at, the world would collapse into chaos. Pharaohs ruled as guardians of Ma'at, offering her image to gods as proof of their devotion to order. To live by Ma'at was to live honestly, to treat others fairly, to maintain harmony in society. Her feather crowned the scales of the afterlife, against which each heart was weighed. In every sunrise, every law, and every ritual, Egyptians saw her presence. She was the fabric of existence itself. Pharaohs were not merely rulers, but living gods. In life, each pharaoh was Horus, in death, Osiris. They stood at the threshold of mortal and divine, ensuring order endured. Their crowns, their rituals, and their monuments reflected this sacred duty. When pharaohs spoke, their words carried divine authority. Monuments like pyramids and colossal statues were not vanity, but vessels of eternity, ensuring their spirits lived among the stars. Through them, the people believed the cosmos remained stable. The pyramids themselves were more than tombs. They were stairways to heaven. Rising from the desert with geometric perfection, they guided pharaohs into the eternal company of the gods. Within lay treasures, food, texts, and sacred amulets, ensuring the ruler's eternal life. Their alignment with stars and directions reflected cosmic order. Building them required vast coordination, not of slaves, but of skilled workers who labored out of devotion and duty. Even today, their massive silhouettes whisper of ambition, faith, and humanity's reach toward the divine. Guarding the plateau stood the Sphinx, half lion, half human. Its weathered face still radiates majesty, a reminder that power must be both fierce and wise. Legends spoke of riddles, silence guarding secrets of eternity. To Egyptians, it was a protector at thresholds, marking the border between the known and unknown. As winds swept across its form, they carried whispers of prayers and the determination of a civilization to endure. Magic, or Hika, was not superstition, but the very energy of existence. Even the gods wielded it. Humans used it daily, inscribing spells on amulets, speaking words over wounds, singing charms to protect children. Priests used Heka in healing, blessings, and protection of harvests. Writing itself was magical, for hieroglyphs carried power. There was no separation between religion and magic. Both were threads of the same tapestry. Through Heka, Egyptians believed the world was continuously created, sustained, and renewed. Amulets and symbols filled Egyptian life with meaning. The Ankh represented eternal life. The scarab beetle embodied rebirth, echoing the rising sun. The Djed pillar symbolized stability and Osiris's strength. These objects were not decorations, but living prayers, worn on bodies, placed in tombs, carved into temples. Even colors carried significance. Green for growth, gold for divinity, black for rebirth, every detail of their art was infused with symbolism, ensuring divine presence in every aspect of existence. Daily life was steeped in these beliefs. Farmers plowed with prayers to the Nile. Mothers blessed their children before sleep. Fishermen offered thanks for their catch. Craftsmen carved protective symbols into their work. Death was ever near, but it was not feared. It was prepared for with care, seen as transition rather than end. Tombs, no matter how humble, were filled with goods and love, easing the soul's journey. To live in Egypt was to live each day as an extension of the eternal. Evening in Egypt carried with it the hush of eternity. Families gathered near small lamps, listening to tales that intertwined gods and men. These stories were not idle entertainment. They were lessons in survival, morality, and hope. When storms rose from the desert, Egyptians explained them as the raging of Seth. When cunning triumphed over strength, they recalled Isis's wisdom. When the sun broke once more at dawn, it was the victory of Ra, proof that light could not be swallowed by chaos. Children grew up steeped in these myths. They learned that Horus's restored eye represented protection, health, and wholeness. They heard that Osiris's resurrection promised eternal life. They saw in Isis the model of devotion, in Ma'at the embodiment of fairness. These were not distant abstractions, but patterns woven into daily life. To retell a myth was to rehearse the values of Egypt itself, teaching that each struggle had purpose, each loss could bring renewal, and every ending bore the seed of another beginning. As centuries unfolded, Egypt's gods reached beyond the Nile. Through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange, Isis found temples across the Mediterranean, worshipped as mother and savior far from her homeland. Thoth merged with Hermes into Hermes Trismegistus, whose wisdom inspired Greeks and Romans alike. Egyptian beliefs fused with others, transforming yet enduring. Even when new empires rose, when hieroglyphs fell silent and temples crumbled, the essence of Egyptian faith survived in symbols, art, and philosophy. To speak of eternity, of balance, of the soul's journey, was to echo voices that first rose along the Nile. Philosophers of later ages looked back on Egypt with reverence. They saw in its myths not superstition, but profound metaphor. Creation out of watery chaos, the struggle of order against disorder, the promise of life after death. These were truths that transcended one culture. Egypt had shaped the very language through which humanity spoke about divinity. Its images, the Ankh, the scarab, the eye continued to appear long after temples were abandoned. But for the Egyptians themselves, these were not metaphors. They were living reality. To them, the gods walked among people. The river was a god's gift, and the pharaoh was the bridge between heaven and earth. The desert was not empty, but alive with spirits. The stars were not distant, but divine. In every moment, they saw themselves as participants in a cosmic drama. To live was to assist Ra in his daily battle, to uphold Ma'at in every action, to prepare for the judgment that would determine eternal destiny. The funeral rites reflected this certainty. Death was not the end, but a voyage, a passage through Duat to the field of reeds. Families prepared with tenderness. Bodies were washed, anointed, and wrapped, each step accompanied by prayers. Amulets were tucked among the wrappings, scarabs near the heart, eyes of Horus for vision, ankhs for eternal breath. Priests recited spells from the Book of the Dead, guiding the soul through gates and dangers. In tombs, offerings of bread, beer, meat, and fruit were left, ensuring the deceased would not hunger. Scenes painted on walls showed fishing, farming, and feasting. not memories, but promises of what awaited. The Hall of Ma'at stood as the final threshold. Osiris presided on his throne, green of skin, white of robe, wearing the tall Atef crown. Before him stood the scales. On one side lay the feather of truth, on the other, the heart of the deceased. Anubis adjusted the balance, watchful. Thoth stood by, recording. If the heart balanced, the soul passed into bliss. If not, Ammit devoured it, ending existence. This vision gave moral weight to every action in life. Egyptians knew their deeds would be measured not by wealth or status, but by the truth of their hearts. Beyond judgment lay paradise, the field of reeds. Here, souls lived as they had on earth, but without suffering. Families reunited. Fields yielded endlessly. Waters of the Nile flowed calmly. It was not a heaven of leisure, but of fulfillment, a continuation of life perfected. For Egyptians, this was the greatest hope that death would return them to a land where nothing failed, where order and abundance endured eternally. Daily rituals reinforced these beliefs. At dawn, hymns were sung to awaken Ra. At sunset, prayers accompanied his descent. Families honored ancestors with offerings, believing their spirits lingered nearby. Farmers timed their planting to the flood, thanking Hapi for his gift. Children learned early to speak blessings, to touch amulets, to trust in gods who listened. In each gesture, they upheld Ma'at. Egyptian art and architecture reflected this fusion of myth and life. Tomb paintings showed journeys into Duat. Temples displayed colossal statues, each embodying divine presence. Columns blossomed with lotus and papyrus, eternal symbols of rebirth. Walls bore hieroglyphs that were not simply writing, but enchantments, living words sustaining the world. Gold shimmered not for luxury, but to reflect the flesh of gods. Black granite symbolized eternal strength, green stones eternal growth. Every detail carried meaning, reminding all who entered that they walked in sacred space. The pharaoh stood at the center of it all. In rituals, he offered Ma'at to the gods, proving his worthiness. In festivals, he embodied Horus, the protector. At death, he became Osiris, the ruler of eternity. His role was not only political, but cosmic. The people saw in him the assurance that chaos would not prevail, that the cycle of sun and flood would continue. Monuments built in his name were built for all, for his spirit to guard the land, for his order to sustain generations. This sacred kingship inspired loyalty and awe. When people gazed at pyramids, obelisks, or colossal statues, they were reminded not just of power, but of connection to the eternal. Even in hardship, famine, or invasion, the vision endured. Egypt was upheld by Ma'at, protected by Horus, renewed by Osiris, blessed by Ra. As centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, but the myths endured. Even as foreign rulers came, they adopted Egyptian gods, built temples, and inscribed prayers. Such was the power of these beliefs. They absorbed change, transforming without vanishing. The Nile still rose, the sun still returned, the stars still turned overhead. In that rhythm, Egyptians saw proof that their myths were eternal. To truly understand Egyptian myth, one must enter the temples, feel the weight of their stone, and hear the echo of prayers once sung within them. Each temple was a universe in miniature, its halls and sanctuaries arranged as a map of creation. Passing through its gates, a worshiper symbolically journeyed from the outer world into the heart of eternity. At the entrance, towering pylons resembled mountains at dawn, between which the sun rose each day. Their surfaces were covered with scenes of Pharaoh smiting enemies, proof that order triumphed over chaos. Within lay open courtyards, where ordinary people might gather, presenting offerings of bread, beer, and flowers. Further inside stood hypostyle halls, filled with columns like a forest of stone, each one carved with hieroglyphs and painted in bright colors. These halls were dim, filled with incense and shafts of filtered light, preparing the soul for the Holy of Holies. At last came the sanctuary, the most secret chamber, where the statue of the god resided. Only priests and pharaoh could enter, tending to the deity with daily rituals. These rituals were intimate acts. The statue was awakened at dawn, washed, anointed with oils, dressed in linen, and presented with meals of bread, meat, fruit, and wine. Hymns and prayers accompanied every action. The gods were not imagined as distant, but as present, alive within their images, dependent upon care. And in receiving this devotion, they renewed the cosmos. To neglect a god statue was to endanger balance itself. Festivals extended this divine presence into the lives of the people. On sacred days, the god's image was carried out of the temple, placed upon a gilded bark, and paraded through the streets or floated along the Nile. Crowds gathered, singing and dancing, offering incense and flowers. Such moments collapsed the distance between human and divine. The gods traveled among their people, blessing them with protection and fertility. The myths themselves were enacted in these ceremonies. When priests chanted the triumph of Horus over Seth, it was not remembrance, but recreation. By retelling the myth, they ensured its truth continued in the present. Ritual was performance, but performance with power. It made myth real, sustaining the order of the world. This union of myth, ritual, and daily life explains why Egyptian religion endured for millennia. It wasn't fragile belief, but woven into every rhythm. The flood of the Nile, the rise of the sun, the authority of Pharaoh, the turning of seasons. To live in Egypt was to live inside myth. Among the deities honored most widely was Isis, who embodied devotion, motherhood, and magical skill. Her story of seeking and restoring Osiris resonated with Egyptians as a model of loyalty and perseverance. Women prayed to her for fertility, safe childbirth, and protection of children. Sailors invoked her as guardian of voyages. In later centuries, her worship spread far beyond Egypt, reaching Greece, Rome, and beyond, where she was revered as universal mother and savior. Her adaptability reflected her power. Wherever she was worshipped, she absorbed local traditions while retaining her essence. Horus, her son, symbolized kingship and victory. Depicted as a falcon, or as a man with a falcon's head, he soared above the land, his keen eyes watching all. Each pharaoh claimed to be Horus incarnate, ensuring stability and order. The myth of Horus's struggle against Seth became a model for political legitimacy. Just as Horus triumphed over chaos, so did Pharaoh keep Egypt secure. In every coronation, Horus was reborn. In every temple inscription, his victory was proclaimed anew. Set, though villain in many tales, was never banished from the pantheon. He embodied chaos, storm, and desert, forces that could not be eliminated, but only controlled. In some regions, he was even honored as protector of Ra, standing at the prow of the sunbark, spearing Apophis each night. This dual role reflected the Egyptian view of reality. Chaos was dangerous but necessary. Opposition was part of balance. Even disorder had its place in Ma'at, as long as it was restrained. The underworld, Duat, was a place both feared and hoped for. It was imagined as a landscape of caverns, rivers, and gates, each guarded by beings with fearsome forms. The soul traveled through it at night, accompanied by spells and prayers. Texts like the Book of the Dead, the Coffin texts, and the Amduat mapped this perilous journey. They were guides, showing the soul how to pass dangers, how to speak passwords, how to avoid demons. Yet the underworld was not only terror, it was also where Ra traveled each night, renewing his power. At midnight, he joined with Osiris, absorbing strength from the Lord of the Dead, ensuring that dawn would return. Thus, Duat was a realm of regeneration as well as trial. Passing through it, the soul became purified, ready for eternal life. For Egyptians, morality was practical as well as spiritual. To live in accordance with Mahat was to ensure not only social harmony, but also salvation. Lies, theft, cruelty. These made the heart heavy, endangering it at the scales. Honesty, generosity, and respect made the heart light, securing eternity. In this way, myth governed conduct, linking daily choices to cosmic destiny. Symbols reinforced these truths. The Ankh, shaped like a looped cross, was everywhere, carried by gods, carved into walls, worn as amulet. It represented life eternal, the breath of existence. The Eye of Horus, with its elegant lines, symbolized protection and healing, placed on coffins and worn on bodies. The scarab beetle, rolling its ball of dung, was linked to the sun god, who rolled the sun across the sky. To wear a scarab was to embrace rebirth. The Djed pillar, tall and ribbed, represented stability and Osiris's enduring spine. Together, these symbols formed a visual language of eternity. Egyptian art was not decorative alone, it was functional. Every image, every carving, every color carried purpose. Red symbolized chaos and danger, but also vitality. Green symbolized life and growth. Black was fertility and rebirth, reflecting the rich soil. Gold symbolized divinity, eternal and untarnishing. Proportions in art followed sacred rules, ensuring order. Depictions of gods and pharaohs were not portraits, but ideals, embodiments of eternal forms. Architecture, too, followed sacred patterns. Pyramids aligned with stars, temples with solstices. Obelisks pointed skyward, capturing the rays of Ra. Tombs were dug into cliffs, painted with journeys of the soul. These structures were not simply for memory, but for function. They ensured the continued presence of gods and the endurance of order. In every aspect of Egyptian life, from the grand monuments to the simplest household charms, myth was present. It gave meaning to suffering, purpose to work, and hope to death. It connected individuals to the cosmos, assuring them that their lives, however brief, were part of eternity. Life in ancient Egypt unfolded beneath the rhythm of myth. The Nile's annual flood was not just a natural occurrence, it was the lifeblood of the land, a divine gift from Hapi. Every field that blossomed, every stalk of grain that rose, was a visible reminder of the gods' favor. The river was not merely water, it was eternity flowing across the earth, sustaining all. Farmers watched the river carefully, praying for its rise to be generous, but not destructive. Too little water meant famine. Too much meant ruin. Hymns to Hapi asked for balance, and when the river swelled gently, joy filled the villages. Families gathered to celebrate. Children splashed in the waters, and priests offered thanks in temples. This cycle of abundance and anxiety mirrored Egypt's understanding of life. Order was precious, but fragile, always threatened by chaos, always secured through devotion. In villages, daily routines were infused with reverence. At dawn, families greeted the sun with simple prayers, acknowledging Ra's triumph over Apophis. Meals began with offerings of a little bread or beer set aside for ancestors, whose spirits lingered and protected their descendants. Mothers whispered blessings over their children as they dressed them, invoking Bastet for safety and Hathor for joy. Farmers plowed fields while reciting chants. Craftsmen carved amulets into their work, and fishermen poured a few drops of their catch back into the river as thanks. Even the humblest hut was decorated with protective symbols. Eyes of Horus painted above doorways kept away envy and illness. Clay figures of dwarfish buas guarded against nightmares. Amulets hung around children's necks, ensuring they would not fall prey to wandering spirits. In this way, the boundary between sacred and mundane was dissolved. Every act, every gesture was linked to the divine. Death, though ever near, was not dreaded. It was prepared for with care, even by the poor. Simple graves held pottery filled with food, beads, and charms. Families visited tombs with offerings, speaking to the dead as though they listened, which Egyptians believed they did. To them, ancestors were not gone, but present, walking unseen alongside the living. Communication with the departed was a comfort, a way of ensuring continuity. The wealthier could afford elaborate tombs, decorated with scenes of life and eternity. Walls displayed farmers plowing, fishermen casting nets, bakers baking, not as memories but as blueprints of the afterlife. What was painted was made real in eternity. A man who painted fields on his tomb walls would reap them forever in the field of reeds. A woman who showed herself with children would be eternally surrounded by family. In this way, art was magic, shaping destiny beyond death. Priests guided the passage of souls. The process of mummification was sacred, lasting weeks, during which the body was purified, dried, wrapped, and adorned with spells. Each step was an invocation of Anubis, ensuring the vessel was intact for recognition in the afterlife. The heart was preserved, the body adorned with scarabs, ankhs, and protective texts. Coffins were painted with gods and prayers, faces gilded to reflect the radiance of eternity. Texts such as the Book of the Dead were central to these preparations. Written on papyrus or tomb walls, they contained spells, instructions, and hymns. They told the soul what to say at each gate, what to avoid, what names to call upon. The words themselves carried power. To recite them was to enact reality. To die without them was to risk being lost in duat, wandering without direction. The vision of the afterlife was vivid. The soul was imagined as a ba, a bird with a human head, which could leave the body by day and return by night. The ka, the life force, required food and drink, hence offerings left in tombs. The ak, the blessed spirit, shone like a star once judgment was passed. Together, these aspects ensured the soul's endurance. Without proper rites, the soul might become restless, a ghost haunting the living. With them, it could rise to the field of reeds, shining forever under Ra's light. This understanding of life, death, and eternity shaped Egyptian society profoundly. To act justly was to ensure salvation. To uphold Ma'at was to preserve both community and personal destiny. Injustice threatened not only the state, but the very order of the cosmos. Pharaoh's role was to guard Ma'at on a grand scale. Each individual's role was to live by it daily. This sense of responsibility gave Egyptian culture remarkable stability. For millennia, the same values, symbols, and rituals endured, binding generations into continuity. Even when invaders came, even when dynasties fell, the heart of belief persisted. Foreign rulers built temples to Egyptian gods, adopted their rituals, and sought legitimacy through their myths. Such was the resilience of this worldview. It absorbed and adapted, but never vanished. The reach of Egyptian belief extended far beyond its borders. Traders carried amulets and stories across the Mediterranean. Foreigners marveled at temples rising from the desert, at hieroglyphs that seemed like art, but were living words. Greek and Roman writers described Egypt as a land of wisdom, its priests keepers of secrets. They told of initiation into mysteries, of hidden knowledge locked in temples. Egypt became a symbol of ancient truth, a fountain of philosophy and magic. Even today, echoes remain. The Ankh is worn as a symbol of life. The Eye of Horus appears in jewelry, art, and even modern iconography. The pyramids, silhouetted against desert skies, inspire awe and speculation. Myths of resurrection, judgment, and eternal life resonate in cultures worldwide, shaped by the voices of the Nile. For the Egyptians themselves, however, it was not symbol, but reality. To them, gods walked with mortals, the dead conversed with the living, and eternity was as close as the sunrise. Their world was alive with meaning, infused with myth at every step. To walk along the Nile was to walk in the shadow of gods. To see the sun rise was to witness Ra's triumph. To act justly was to uphold Ma'at. To die was to journey, not to end. It is this vision of life as sacred, of death as transition, of eternity as certainty, that gave their civilization its endurance. Their myths, far from fading, still whisper to us across time, inviting us to step into their world, to see through their eyes, to believe as they believed that nothing truly ends, but all is renewed in the great rhythm of existence. The gods of Egypt were not distant abstractions, but companions woven into the cycles of existence. Each deity held both cosmic power and personal intimacy, shaping nature while also guiding individuals. To speak their names was to invite presence. To carve their images was to grant them a vessel in the world. Ra, the great sun god, dominated the pantheon as the giver of light and life. His journey across the sky was the heartbeat of time itself. Each sunrise was a triumph, each sunset a passage into mystery. At night he traveled through Duat, guarded by gods, and defended against Apophis. Without his victory, dawn would never return. For Egyptians, to greet the sun was to witness living proof of resilience. They saw themselves as allies in his battle, their prayers and rituals strengthening his hand against the serpent of chaos. Osiris, though lord of the dead, embodied life. His green skin reflected vegetation and renewal, his white garments, purity, his crown, sovereignty. His myth of death and resurrection gave hope to all who faced mortality. In Osiris, Egyptians found assurance that death was not annihilation, but transformation. His throne in the underworld was not a place of terror, but of justice, where souls found what they deserved. Families prayed to join him, believing his reign was benevolent and eternal. Isis, his consort, was more than mother and wife. She was magic itself, the healer, the protector, the one whose devotion overcame death. Her image with Horus on her lap became an eternal symbol of nurturing, echoed in cultures far beyond Egypt. Her prayers were whispered by mothers, sailors, and kings alike. She was called the Great Enchantress, for her words bound reality itself. In her myth, devotion was not weakness, but strength. Love was not passive, but triumphant. Horus, her son, symbolized victory over chaos. His falcon eyes saw all, his wings spanned the sky. As avenger of Osiris, he embodied righteous struggle, perseverance, and triumph. Pharaohs drew legitimacy from him, believing they ruled as Horus incarnate. To oppose Pharaoh was to oppose the falcon god himself. To honor Horus was to affirm the endurance of order. Seth, though demonized in certain myths, was more complex than villain alone. He was desert storms, wild force, unpredictable danger. Yet he was also protector of Ra, spear in hand, standing at the prow of the solar bark to strike Apophis. Chaos wasn't only enemy, but necessity, a force that tested, a challenge that made order meaningful. Seth's worship reflected this duality. Feared, yes, but also respected. Without opposition, there could be no balance. Anubis guided souls through peril, black jackal head watching the threshold. He embodied care and precision, embalming bodies to ensure recognition, weighing hearts to ensure fairness. He was not cruel but impartial, ensuring that each soul received truth. His presence gave families comfort, for they knew their dead were not abandoned, but guided. To see a priest in jackal mask was not horror, but reassurance. Anubis was near. Thoth represented wisdom's calm. He measured time, recorded deeds, mediated disputes. His ibis head looked thoughtful, his pen poised. He invented hieroglyphs, the sacred writing that carried prayer into eternity. In his presence, chaos became calculation, anger became reason. He was not warrior, but counselor, ensuring balance through words and numbers. Scribes prayed to him, astronomers honored him, priests invoked him. He was the quiet force that kept the cosmos precise. Hathor's laughter filled shrines with joy. She was music, dance, love, and beauty. Her sistrum rattled away sorrow. Her embrace comforted both the living and the dead. She was goddess of the sky and of the hearth, of celebration and of tenderness. To honor her was to affirm life's sweetness, to admit that joy was sacred. Even death was softened in her arms, for she welcomed souls into eternity with gentleness. Sekhmet roared with fury, lioness unleashed from Ra's fire. She toppled armies, spread plague, and blazed with divine wrath. Yet she was also healer, her priests doctors, who knew herbs, spells, and remedies. She embodied life's fiercest paradox. The same power that destroyed could restore. Festivals of intoxication were held to soothe her rage, music and beer transforming her fire into warmth. In her duality, Egyptians saw truth. Danger and cure were twins, destruction and renewal inseparable. Bastet purred with serenity, cat-headed goddess of home and protection. She was beloved in households, where cats prowled not only as hunters, but as divine companions. To stroke a cat was to touch her blessing. To harm one was unthinkable, for Bastet's wrath was as fierce as her tenderness was gentle. She reminded people that love itself was protective, that warmth could guard as surely as claws. Hapi swelled the river each year, his plump body flowing with abundance. He was celebrated with hymns of gratitude, his waters seen as lifeblood of Egypt. In him, Egyptians recognized the rhythm of survival, lean years and fertile years, scarcity and bounty, all within his flow. To honor Hapi was to honor life's dependence on cycles, to admit gratitude for every harvest. Mahat, feather on her head, wings spread wide, was the principle that bound all. She was truth, justice, harmony, the balance between opposites. Without her, gods and men alike would falter. Pharaoh offered her image to other gods, proving his devotion to order. Judges swore by her. Families taught her to children. Priests invoked her at rituals. In death, her feather decided fates. In life, her presence guided honesty, fairness, and balance. The pantheon was vast, yet cohesive. Every god held a role, every role a place in the grand design. To Egyptians, divinity was not a hierarchy of rivals, but a web of forces, cooperating, clashing, renewing. Myths explained relationships, conflicts, and reconciliations, showing that even among gods, balance was achieved through struggle. Humanity's role was to mirror this balance, to live in harmony with gods and nature alike. In this worldview, nothing was accidental. A storm was Seth's roar, a flood Hapi's gift, a sunrise Ra's triumph, a good harvest Osiris's blessing. Even misfortune carried meaning, a lesson, a test, a reminder of Mahat's fragility. Life was sacred theater, and each person a participant in its drama. Such beliefs gave Egyptians profound resilience. Famine, war, or invasion did not erase their faith. Instead, they turned to their myths for understanding, seeing hardship as part of the eternal struggle of order against chaos. Their rituals reaffirmed hope. Their prayers restored confidence. Through millennia, their culture endured not by chance, but by conviction that the cosmos itself was on there. To step into the sacred landscape of Egypt was to step into a living myth. The desert stretched vast and silent, yet it was not barren in Egyptian imagination. It was the domain of Seth, the god of storms and disorder. The fertile valley of the Nile, green and abundant, belonged to Osiris, lord of renewal. The horizon, where the sun rose each morning, was the realm of Ra, reborn daily. Every place carried divine identity, every landmark a story. Temples rose as mountains of stone, designed not simply as places of worship, but as embodiments of the cosmos. Their pylons were the horizon, their floors the earth, their ceilings the starry sky. Painted across these ceilings were constellations, goddesses stretching as celestial maps. Within these walls, the sacred was tangible. Hieroglyphs lined every surface, not as writing alone, but as spells. Words alive with Heka, sustaining the gods themselves. Priests carried out daily rites with precision, believing that neglecting even the smallest offering could endanger the balance of the universe. They awoke statues of gods at dawn, washed them, clothed them in linen, adorned them with jewelry, and set food before them. These were not symbols, but necessities. The gods were present in their statues, dependent on such care. In return, they blessed the land, its people, and Pharaoh. Pharaoh's role was central. He was Horus in life, Osiris in death, the axis around which Egypt turned. His responsibility was immense: to uphold Ma'at, to ensure that temples functioned, that rituals were performed, that enemies were subdued, and that chaos was held at bay. His image carved into temple walls was not vanity, but sacred duty, showing him smiting foes, feeding gods, maintaining order. Festivals brought myth to life for the people. During the beautiful Feast of the Valley, families visited tombs, bringing food and flowers, uniting the living and the dead. During Opet, statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were carried in procession from Karnak to Luxor, accompanied by music, dance, and rejoicing. These festivals were not mere holidays, but recreations of mythic events, renewing divine presence among the people. Even ordinary households mirrored these beliefs. In homes, shrines to ancestors stood alongside images of protective gods. Families poured libations, lit lamps, and spoke prayers. In sickness, charms were recited, amulets pressed to the skin, and appeals made to Sekhmet for healing. In childbirth, women invoked Taweret, the hippo goddess, for safe delivery. In daily meals, portions were set aside for the Ka of the departed. Every corner of life was infused with divine connection. Myths themselves were not static. They evolved, reshaped by priests, retold by storytellers, reinterpreted by dynasties. In some tales, Horus was child of Isis alone. In others, of both Isis and Osiris. In some versions, Seth murdered Osiris outright. In others, he only trapped him. This fluidity did not weaken belief. It strengthened it, showing myths as living, adaptable truths. What mattered was not fixed detail, but enduring meaning. The triumph of order, the promise of renewal, the certainty of justice. The underworld texts reflected this adaptability. The Book of the Dead contained hundreds of spells, no two papyri alike, tailored to individual needs. Some emphasized protection, others navigation. others persuasion before the gods. The Amduat, describing Ra's nightly journey, was inscribed in royal tombs to ensure kings shared in the sun, God's renewal. The coffin texts, painted on wooden coffins, democratized access to the afterlife, allowing non-royals to claim its promises. Each new collection expanded the mythology, ensuring it reached all levels of society. The field of reeds remained the ultimate goal. Here, the just lived eternally, plowing and reaping without toil, feasting without hunger, reuniting with family. It was not an escape from life, but its perfect continuation. Egyptians did not imagine eternal idleness, but eternal fulfillment, where work was joy, where family bonds never broke, where order never faltered. It was heaven grounded in the familiar, sanctified by abundance. This vision shaped Egyptian resilience. In times of hardship, famine, or foreign rule, they trusted in the god's order, believing that balance would be restored. Their myths provided explanation, comfort, and hope. A poor harvest was Seth's disruption. A victorious campaign was Horus's triumph. Each event, large or small, was framed within the cosmic story. It is for this reason that Egyptian culture endured for thousands of years, longer than almost any other. Its myths were not fragile tales, but frameworks of meaning, flexible yet eternal. Even as new rulers came, even as other empires rose and fell, Egypt remained itself, its identity preserved by its stories. Among the countless deities, some held places of especially deep affection in the Egyptian heart. Anubis, with his jackal head and sleek black form, was one of these. He was the guardian of thresholds, the companion of the dead, the master of embalming. To families, he was not a terrifying figure, but a protector who ensured their loved ones were not abandoned on the dangerous road to eternity. Rituals of mummification were performed in his name. Priests wearing jackal masks spoke sacred words as they wrapped bodies in linen, anointed them with oils, and placed charms in the folds. Each movement mirrored the work of Anubis himself, who was believed to watch over the process. His presence ensured the body would remain recognizable to the soul. He also stood in the Hall of Ma'at, overseeing the weighing of the heart. Without his fairness, judgment could not be trusted. To see his black figure was to see assurance. The soul would be guided justly. Hathor, by contrast, embodied joy and beauty. She was the cow-eared goddess of love, music, and motherhood, and her temples resounded with laughter and song. Priestesses shook sistrums, dancers spun, and offerings of flowers and wine filled the air with fragrance. Hathor's presence softened sorrow, turned mourning into comfort, and gave sweetness to the rhythm of life. Mothers prayed to her for safe births, lovers for devotion, and communities for harmony. She was both celestial and intimate, a goddess of the heavens and the hearth. Thoth, calm and wise, guided thought and language. Depicted with the head of an ibis, or sometimes a baboon, he was scribe of the gods, keeper of accounts, recorder of truth. To him was attributed the invention of hieroglyphs, those sacred pictures that bound sound and meaning. Writing was itself magic, a divine craft that preserved memory and commanded reality. Scribes prayed to him before setting reed pen to papyrus, seeking clarity and precision. Astronomers honored him for his mastery of the moon's cycles, his regulation of time. In myth, he mediated disputes among gods, bringing peace where anger raged. He stood at the scales of judgment, noting each verdict, ensuring truth endured. Sekhmet roared with lion's ferocity, born of Ra's fire. She was unleashed to punish rebellion, and her fury burned like the desert sun. Her breath was plague, her eyes destruction. Yet even she held a healing hand. Priests of Sekhmet were skilled in medicine, channeling her energy into cures. Rituals sought to soothe her rage, with music, laughter, and rivers of beer dyed red to resemble blood. In intoxication she transformed, her wrath dissolving into joy. She was paradox embodied, devastation and salvation in one. Egyptians saw in her the reminder that power could both harm and heal, that destruction and renewal were inseparable forces of existence. Bastet, feline and graceful, balanced her. She was gentleness, protection, and warmth. In homes, cats prowled as her sacred companions, guarding against pests and evil. Families cherished them, believing they carried Bastet's blessing. Her temples were filled with offerings of bronze cats, testimony to devotion. She was beloved, yet her claws reminded all that tenderness could defend as fiercely as ferocity. The Nile itself was personified as Hapi, the plump god of abundance. Each year, as the river swelled, hymns rose to him in gratitude. He was shown with blue or green skin, breasts and belly full, symbolizing fertility. His gift was life itself. Without his waters, Egypt would wither. With them, it flourished. Farmers relied on his rhythm, planting when the flood receded, reaping when the fields grew rich. In him, Egyptians saw the constancy of renewal, the assurance that survival followed trust in cycles. Ma'at stood beyond all as the principle of existence. She was both goddess and order, the balance that held heaven and earth together. Her feather crowned the scales of judgment. Her name was invoked by pharaohs as proof of legitimacy, by judges as foundation of fairness, by families as guide to daily life. To live in Ma'at was to live rightly, honestly, harmoniously. Without her, the universe would collapse into Isfet, chaos. With her, eternity endured. Pharaoh himself was the embodiment of this balance. He was not simply king, but God on earth, Horus in life, Osiris in death. His duty was cosmic, to uphold Ma'at, defeat enemies, build temples, and sustain the gods with offerings. His image carved on walls showed him smiting foes, not as personal triumph, but as ritual act of restoring order. His coronation was more than political. It was divine confirmation that Horus reigned again. In his death, his tomb became stairway to eternity, ensuring his K continued to protect Egypt. The pyramids rose as monumental affirmations of this role. They were not simply tombs, but cosmic machines, aligning with stars, reflecting sunlight, embodying order. Within them, Pharaoh's body was preserved, his chamber filled with treasures and texts. Their very stones spoke of permanence, of humanity's grasp toward eternity. To gaze upon them was to see the axis of earth and heaven joined. Guarding them stood the Sphinx, enigmatic and eternal. Its leonine body and human face spoke of strength and wisdom combined. Though winds wore its stone, its gaze remained unbroken, watching centuries pass. Legends claimed it asked riddles, guarding knowledge. To Egyptians, it was protector of thresholds, sentinel of mysteries. Its silence carried power, reminding all who passed that eternity watched. In the heart of these beliefs lay magic, or Hika. This was not superstition, but the energy of creation itself. Gods wielded it, and humans could access it through words, symbols, and rituals. Spells inscribed on amulets, spoken over wounds, sung in lullabies carried real power. Writing was itself magical, each hieroglyph a force. There was no divide between religion and magic. Both were threads of one fabric. Through Heka, existence itself was sustained. Symbols gave form to these truths. The Ankh embodied eternal life. The scarab beetle rolled the sun across the sky, emblem of rebirth. The Djed pillar stood for Osiris's enduring stability. These were not ornaments, but prayers made tangible, carried, worn, carved, painted. Even colors held meaning. Gold as flesh of gods, green as life, black as fertility, red as chaos and vitality. To live surrounded by symbols was to live enfolded in eternity. Daily life reflected this sacred tapestry. Farmers offered thanks for each harvest. Fishermen blessed their catch. Mothers whispered prayers over children. Craftsmen carved protective signs into furniture, clothing, and tools. Even in laughter and play, the gods were present, for joy was Hathor's gift. In hardship, people turned to Sekhmet for healing, to Isis for protection, to Osiris for comfort. In every corner of existence, divinity was near. Through this integration, Egypt achieved extraordinary endurance. Dynasties fell, rulers changed, invaders came and went, but the essence of belief remained. It was flexible, absorbing new influences, yet eternal, preserving its core. Even when foreign powers ruled, they built temples to Egyptian gods, adopted rituals, and claimed legitimacy through Mahat. The voice of the Nile never faded, whispering myths that bound people to eternity. Night over Egypt was as alive with meaning as day. The desert cooled, the stars burned clear, and the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a celestial river. To Egyptians, it was not emptiness, but the reflection of the Nile above, the heavenly twin of the earthly river. Souls of the blessed were imagined as stars, shining forever in the company of the gods. Nut, the goddess of the sky, arched her body above the world, her form studded with stars. Each night she swallowed the sun, and each dawn she gave birth to it again. Her consort, Geb, lay beneath her as the earth, fertile and enduring. Between them, Shu held sky and ground apart, creating the space for life. This cosmic family shaped the Egyptians' understanding of the universe, not abstract forces, but divine beings, whose actions explained the turning of the world. Ra's nightly voyage through the underworld was central to this vision. In his solar bark, he sailed through 12 gates, each marking an hour of darkness. With him traveled gods, spirits, and protectors, guarding against Apophis, the great serpent of chaos. At midnight, Ra united with Osiris, drawing strength from the Lord of the Dead. By dawn, renewed, he rose again into the sky. This cycle repeated endlessly, proof that death was never final, that renewal always followed. For Egyptians, this myth was not distant story, but daily reality. Each sunrise was proof that Ra had triumphed again, that light had prevailed. Their prayers, offerings, and rituals were thought to strengthen him in battle, aligning human devotion with cosmic necessity. To live faithfully was to ensure the sun's return, to participate in the victory of order over chaos. Creation myths reinforced this eternal renewal. In Heliopolis, it was told that Atum rose alone from the primordial waters of Nun, forming himself from nothing. He created Shu and Tefnut, who in turn gave birth to Geb and Nut, whose children became Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. From them, the world unfolded, a divine genealogy explaining all. In Hermopolis, 8 deities called the Hogdoad represented chaos itself, darkness, water, infinity, and hiddenness. From their union rose the primeval mound and the sun. In Memphis, Ptah, the craftsman god, created by thought and speech, conceiving the world in his heart and bringing it forth with his tongue. Each version reflected truth, not contradiction. For Egyptians, creation was not a single event, but a mystery retold in many ways. What mattered was not one story, but the assurance that the world arose from chaos into order, sustained by divine will. Every dawn, every flood, Every harvest was recreation, proof that the cosmos endured. The concept of Ma'at tied all together. She was balance, truth, and justice, woven into creation itself. Without her, the gods could not function, nor the world endure. Pharaoh's duty was to uphold her, offering her image to the gods, ensuring order. In courts, judges swore by her. In homes, parents taught children her name. In the afterlife, her feather determined each soul's fate. To Egyptians, Ma'at was not abstraction, but the law of existence itself. Pharaoh embodied this cosmic duty. His rule was not simply governance, but participation in divine order. Each temple he built, each victory he claimed, was portrayed as triumph of Ma'at over Isfet, order over chaos. His daily rituals sustained the gods. His monuments aligned heaven and earth. In him, the people saw assurance that the cosmos remained balanced. Even in death, his preservation in tombs ensured continuity, his spirit guarding Egypt forever. The pyramids exemplified this role. Rising from desert sands, they were mountains of eternity, linking earth to sky. Their precision reflected cosmic order, their orientation aligned with stars. Within them, texts and treasures ensured Pharaoh's passage to the afterlife, where he would join the gods and continue to protect his people. They were not only tombs, but eternal statements. Order endures. Pharaoh reigns. Egypt lives. The Sphinx stood as guardian of these truths. Its lion body symbolized strength, its human face wisdom, together embodying the ideal ruler. Carved from stone, it watched centuries pass, its silence more powerful than words. To Egyptians, it was sentinel at the threshold, protector of mysteries, proof that eternity kept watch. In myths, magic Heka was the energy of creation itself. Even gods wielded it, and humans could share in it. Spells, amulets, and rituals were not superstitions, but tools of reality. To inscribe a hieroglyph was to call forth its power. To recite a formula was to shape events. Healing, protection, and transformation flowed through Heka. In this way, Egyptians lived not only in a physical world, but in a magical one, where word and symbol carried weight, equal to stone and water. Amulets embodied this belief. The Ankh gave eternal life, the scarab promised rebirth, the Djed offered stability. Worn, buried, painted, they were prayers made tangible. Each color, each material was chosen with care. Gold for divinity, faience for renewal, lapis lazuli for the heavens. To surround oneself with symbols was to weave protection and blessing into life. Daily practices mirrored this worldview. Farmers poured libations before planting. Fishermen returned part of their catch to the river. Craftsmen carved protective signs into their work. Families lit lamps before shrines, whispered prayers at dawn, left offerings for ancestors. Death was approached not with despair, but with preparation, ensuring that the soul would journey safely. Life itself was ritual, each act a thread in the fabric of eternity. This integration gave Egypt extraordinary resilience. For millennia, dynasties rose and fell. Foreign rulers came and went, but the myths endured. They were flexible, adapting to change, yet eternal in essence. Even when hieroglyphs were forgotten, pyramids eroded, and temples buried, the symbols survived. Their meanings echoed across cultures. The voice of the Nile still whispered, carrying the promise of renewal. The myths of Egypt were not only stories told in temples or inscribed on tombs, they lived in the rhythm of society itself. Every harvest, every festival, every coronation was part of the cosmic narrative. To Egyptians, time was cyclical, not linear. Each year repeated the same sacred events: the flooding of the Nile, the rising of Sirius, the festivals of gods. Through repetition, Order was reaffirmed, chaos held back, and the promise of eternity renewed. Festivals brought this cycle to life. One of the most celebrated was the Opt festival in Thebes. Statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were carried from Karnak to Luxor in grand procession, traveling along the Nile or through decorated streets. Priests sang hymns, musicians played, dancers moved with rhythm, and people rejoiced. The festival symbolized the renewal of kingship, affirming the pharaoh's divine legitimacy. For the people, it was also joy, a time when the gods walked among them, bringing blessing and abundance. Another beloved celebration was the beautiful Feast of the Valley. Families crossed the river to visit tombs, bringing flowers, food, and drink. They honored ancestors, feasted among the dead, and reaffirmed bonds that death could not break. In this mingling of life and death, Egyptians found comfort. The departed were not gone, but continued to share in festivals, part of the eternal community. At Abydos, the mysteries of Osiris were enacted. Processions reenacted his death at the hands of Seth, the mourning of Isis, and his resurrection. Pilgrims came from across Egypt to witness and participate, believing that in joining the ritual, they too shared in Osiris's triumph over death. The ceremonies blended theater, devotion, and magic, making myth tangible, ensuring its truth renewed in each generation. In these festivals, the line between human and divine dissolved. The gods were not remote, but present, carried in barks, touched by offerings, celebrated with song. People danced, prayed, and wept with them. Children learned the stories through participation, absorbing myths not from books, but from living enactment. In this way, belief was passed on as experience, deeply woven into identity. Time itself was sacred. Egyptians measured it by celestial rhythms. The rising of Sirius heralded the new year. The cycles of the moon guided festivals. The path of the sun ordered days. Clocks of water and shadow marked hours. But these were not merely practical. They were symbolic, aligning human life with cosmic order. To measure time was to participate in Ma'at, to keep life aligned with the universe. The architecture of temples reflected this sacred time. Their axes aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and star risings. At certain days, sunlight would pierce inner chambers, illuminating statues of gods. These moments were not accidents, but carefully engineered affirmations of harmony. They showed that temples were not static, but alive, participating in the cycles they represented. Even the smallest rituals reflected this worldview. Before eating, people offered the first morsel to ancestors or gods. Before journeys, they spoke prayers for protection. Before sleep, they recited charms against nightmares. In sickness, they invoked Sekhmet or Bes. In childbirth, Teweret. Life was filled with gestures of faith, each one binding daily acts to eternity. The Egyptian vision of the afterlife reinforced this cycle. Death was not final, but transformation, continuation in another realm. The Ba, the soul bird, flew by day and returned by night. The Ka, the life force, required sustenance through offerings. The Akashwatak, the blessed spirit, shone as a star. To neglect these was to risk unrest. To honor them was to ensure eternal life. Families sustained their dead through offerings, believing that memory and devotion kept spirits strong. In the Hall of Ma'at, each heart was weighed against the feather of truth. This was not only judgment, but renewal. To pass was to join the field of reeds, to live eternally in abundance. To fail was to vanish into nothingness. The scales gave moral weight to life, ensuring that actions mattered, that justice extended beyond death. In this vision, each person's choices contributed to the balance of the cosmos. Symbols guided this passage, Scarabs ensured rebirth, Ankh, eternal breath, Djed pillars, stability. Tombs were inscribed with protective spells, coffins painted with eyes to allow the dead to see, amulets placed carefully among wrappings. These were not adornments, but tools, necessary for survival beyond death. Without them, the soul risked peril. With them, it was armed for eternity. Such integration of life, death, and myth gave Egypt extraordinary continuity. While other civilizations rose and fell quickly, Egypt endured for millennia. Its stability was not only political or geographic, but spiritual. Belief in cycles, in renewal, in Ma'at, created resilience. Change was absorbed, not feared, because cycles promised return. Even when chaos struck, order would rise again, as Ra rose each dawn. Foreigners marveled at this endurance. Greeks and Romans wrote of Egypt as ancient even in their time, a land of mysteries and wisdom. They told of priests guarding secrets, of temples filled with knowledge. They blended Egyptian gods with their own Isis, with Demeter, Thoth with Hermes, Osiris with Dionysus. Egyptian myth spread far, inspiring cults and philosophies. Its symbols crossed seas, its ideas endured in new forms. Yet for Egyptians, the truth was simple. They lived in harmony with the Nile, the sun, and the gods. Their myths were not distant allegories, but living truths. They didn't ask whether Ra truly sailed the sky. They saw him rise each morning. They did not question Osiris's resurrection. They saw crops sprout after death in the fields. Their faith was affirmed daily by the rhythms of nature, proof that myth and life were one. To understand the Egyptians fully, one must appreciate how seamlessly they wove the divine into the practical. Their engineering, medicine, and governance were not apart from myth, but guided by it. For them, science and religion were not opposites, but reflections of the same truth. Take architecture. Temples and pyramids were built with astonishing precision. Stones, weighing tons, were cut, transported, and fitted so tightly that even centuries later, they stand strong. But to Egyptians, this was not simply engineering. It was sacred geometry. Alignments with stars, solstices, and cardinal directions were deliberate, designed to mirror cosmic order. Every measurement was infused with symbolism. The act of building itself was a ritual, recreating the first mound that rose from primordial waters. Medicine, too, blended practicality and divinity. Egyptian physicians studied the body carefully, diagnosing diseases, setting bones, and prescribing herbs. Yet every cure was accompanied by prayer or spell, invoking Sekhmet, Thoth, or Hathor. To heal was not only physical, but spiritual, for illness was often seen as imbalance, intrusion of chaos into order. The remedy restored harmony, both in flesh and in soul. Amulets were placed on the sick, chants recited, herbs applied, all part of a holistic practice that saw health as ma'at within the body. Law and governance reflected the same principle. Pharaoh ruled not merely as monarch, but as upholder of ma'at. Judges swore to speak truth. Scribes recorded decisions with precision. Penalties sought balance rather than vengeance. Justice was cosmic as well as civic. To lie, cheat, or oppress was not only crime against neighbor, but disruption of the universe. The Hall of Ma'at in the afterlife mirrored the courts of earth, ensuring that what was done in life echoed in eternity. Art carried these beliefs into form. Statues of gods were not portraits, but vessels of presence. Proportions were based on sacred grids, ensuring harmony. Colors carried layered meaning: blue for the sky, green for life, gold for the eternal, black for regeneration. Even the smallest amulet was carefully crafted, embodying power. art was not aesthetic alone, but magical, shaping reality. To depict something was to give it existence. To write words was to ensure they lived forever. Hieroglyphs were especially powerful. They were more than script. They were living images. Each symbol carried layers of meaning, sound, and essence. To carve them on stone was to anchor eternity. To write them on papyrus was to call spirits. To erase them was to destroy. Pharaohs often inscribed their names deeply, ensuring they could not be forgotten. Memory was survival. To be remembered was to live forever. Thus, writing itself was sacred ritual. This belief in memory shaped funerary culture. Tombs were houses of eternity, designed to preserve names, images, and offerings. Walls depicted scenes of life, ensuring continuity. Inscriptions called on the living to speak the name of the dead, for each spoken word renewed the spirit. Even the poorest sought modest graves with names etched, so that their souls would not fade. Immortality was tied not only to divine judgment, but to remembrance. The community played its part in sustaining this. Festivals to the dead brought families to tombs, carrying food and drink, speaking with ancestors, sharing stories. Offerings maintained the Ka, the life force. Through this devotion, the boundary between living and dead dissolved. Ancestors protected descendants. Descendants honored ancestors, a cycle of care that extended beyond death. Even leisure and play reflected divine presence. Board games like Senet were not only pastime, but symbolic journey through the afterlife, guiding pieces through obstacles toward renewal. Music echoed through homes and temples, instruments dedicated to Hathor or Bes. Dance was both joy and ritual, movement that honored the gods. Storytelling by lamplight passed myths to children, teaching values in ways they could feel and remember. Foreign contact expanded this worldview, but did not diminish it. Egyptians traded with neighbors, absorbed influences, and sometimes adopted foreign gods into their pantheon. Yet they interpreted all through their own lens, seeing foreign deities as forms of their own. To them, truth was universal, appearing under many names. This adaptability gave their religion resilience, allowing it to endure while others faded. Philosophers of later civilizations looked back on Egypt with awe. Greeks associated Thoth with Hermes, Isis with Demeter, Osiris with Dionysus. They spoke of Egypt as land of mysteries, where hidden knowledge was guarded by priests. Initiates sought wisdom in its temples, and legends of secret rites grew. Though much of this was romanticized, it reflected genuine admiration for Egypt's depth of vision. Even today, echoes remain. Symbols like the Ankh and Eye of Horus appear worldwide. Ideas of judgment after death, resurrection, and eternal life echo Egyptian belief. Their monuments inspire awe. Their myths fuel imagination. Their philosophy still whispers in modern thought. Egypt, though ancient, remains alive in memory, its voice carried forward by stone, story, and spirit. To walk among its ruins is to feel this presence. Pyramids rising against the sky, hieroglyphs carved deep, temples aligned with the sun. Each is testimony to a worldview that saw no separation between sacred and mundane. For Egyptians, everything was divine. Life was ritual. Death was renewal. Eternity was certain. Their myths, enduring for thousands of years, invite us even now to see the world as they did. Alive with meaning, balanced by truth, sustained by devotion. The Egyptian cosmos was built on layers of meaning, where natural phenomena, divine myths, and human actions mirrored each other. To live was to participate in this network of symbols. Nothing was random. Every star, every plant, every season carried spiritual resonance. The annual flooding of the Nile was perhaps the clearest example. Scientifically, it was caused by rains in distant lands, but Egyptians saw it as the tears of Isis, mourning Osiris, swelling the river. The flood was grief transformed into life, sorrow turned into abundance. Farmers watched the waters rise with reverence, for in them they saw divine love sustaining the land. The receding flood left behind black silt, fertile as Osiris's rebirth, ensuring fields blossomed once again. Thus, agriculture was myth in practice, daily labor infused with cosmic truth. The stars, too, spoke of myth. Constellations were not abstract patterns, but gods and spirits. Orion was Osiris, eternal in the sky. Sirius was Isis, whose rising heralded the new year and the flood. The Milky Way was the heavenly Nile, across which souls traveled. To gaze upward at night was to read divine scripture written in light. Priests studied these stars, not only for calendars, but for prophecy, believing they revealed the will of the gods. The sun's path was central to this vision. Each dawn Ra was born, each dusk he died, each night he sailed the underworld. Egyptians measured time by this cycle, structuring rituals around sunrise and sunset. At dawn, hymns awakened the world. At dusk, prayers protected it through darkness. The solar journey symbolized all life birth, death, renewal. To watch the sun was to watch the story of existence unfold each day. Temples embodied this cosmic order. Their pylons framed horizons. Their halls mirrored marshes of creation. Their sanctuaries held the womb of renewal. Ceilings, painted with stars, made worshippers feel they stood beneath Nut's body. Floors carved with water lilies reminded them of the primeval waters. At special moments, solstices, equinoxes, the sun pierced inner chambers, flooding statues with light. These alignments proved temples were not only structures, but instruments, linking heaven and earth. Pharaoh's role was to maintain this link. His rituals were not personal, but cosmic responsibilities. When he offered ma'at to the gods, he symbolically renewed the order of the universe. When he smote enemies on temple walls, it was not mere propaganda, but myth enacted. Horus defeating Seth, order overcoming chaos. His very existence was axis of balance. Egyptians saw in him assurance that the cosmos endured. Festivals expanded this assurance to the people. During great processions, statues of gods left their sanctuaries, traveling on barks, through streets, or along the Nile. Crowds rejoiced, music filled the air, incense rose. The gods were not confined to temples, but present among their worshippers. These festivals collapsed the boundary between divine and human, allowing people to see, touch, and celebrate with their deities. In those moments, eternity touched Earth. The afterlife was woven seamlessly into this worldview. Death was transition, not end. The soul divided and multiplied, Ba, Ka, Ak each, with needs and powers. The Ba flew, the Ka required sustenance, the Ak shone among the stars. Funerary rituals ensured these parts remained whole, guiding the soul through trials. Mummification preserved the body. Tombs preserved memory. Offerings preserved the Ka. Without them, the soul risked dissolution. With them, eternity was assured. Judgment gave moral weight to life. In the hall of Ma'at, the heart was weighed against her feather. The gods watched. Anubis adjusted the scale. Thoth recorded. If the heart was light, the soul passed to bliss. If heavy, Ammit devoured it. This vision ensured that choices mattered, that justice was eternal. It gave dignity to life, for even the poor could achieve eternity if their hearts were true. The field of reeds offered reward, a perfected Egypt, where fields yielded without toil, families reunited, joy endured. Here, life continued not in abstraction, but in familiar abundance. To Egyptians, heaven was not distant paradise, but perfected home, proof that what was good in life was eternal. Magic, or Heka, bound all together. It was not trickery, but the power of creation itself, available to gods and humans. Spells protected children, healed wounds, guarded travelers. Amulets embodied divine presence, worn by living and buried with dead. Words spoken carried force. Images drawn carried reality. To speak was to act. To write was to create. In this worldview, language itself was sacred, bridging thought and being. Symbols gave tangible form to invisible truths. The Ankh for life, Scarab for rebirth, Jed for stability, was scepter for power, Eye of Horus for protection, each distilled meaning into form. They appeared in jewelry, art, tombs, and temples, saturating life with divine presence. Even color was symbolic: red for danger and vitality, green for life, blue for eternity, gold for divinity. To surround oneself with symbols was to dwell in protection. Art and architecture preserved eternity. Walls depicted daily life not for memory, but for continuation. To paint fishing was to fish forever. To carve banquets was to feast eternally. Statues housed Ka, allowing spirits to receive offerings. Obelisks rose like sunbeams frozen in stone, linking earth and sky. Pyramids aligned with stars, their geometry echoing cosmic order. Each work of art was functional, sustaining life, securing eternity. In this seamless blend of myth, ritual, and practice, Egyptians achieved remarkable continuity. For thousands of years, their worldview remained intact, absorbing change without breaking. Dynasties rose and fell, foreign rulers came, but the myths endured. Their adaptability was strength, their symbols eternal. Even when temples fell silent and hieroglyphs were forgotten, their voice persisted, carried through symbols and memory. To study Egypt today is to glimpse this enduring vision. It invites us to see life not as fragments, but as unity, to see cycles of nature as sacred, to treat justice as cosmic, to honor memory as survival. The Egyptians remind us that existence itself can be seen as divine drama, where each Egyptian mythology was not isolated from the world around it. The Nile connected Egypt with lands to the south, east, and Mediterranean north, bringing goods, travelers, and ideas. Yet Egypt absorbed these influences in its own way, filtering them through Ma'at and blending them into its myths. From Nubia came gold, ivory, and exotic animals, along with deities like Dedin, a god of wealth and incense. Egyptians respected Nubia as land of riches, often depicting it as source of abundance. Military campaigns there were justified in mythic terms. Pharaoh extending Horus's order over Seth's wilderness. Yet Nubian gods were also honored in Egyptian temples, showing integration rather than rejection. From the Levant came trade in cedar wood, wine, and silver. Foreign princesses married into Pharaoh's court, bringing their customs and deities. Baal, Resheph, and Astarte entered Egyptian pantheon, worshipped in temples as powerful gods of storm, war, and love. Egyptians did not see contradiction in this. They saw universal truth under different names. A foreign god could be form of Seth, or Horus, Isis, or Hathor. This openness gave their religion flexibility, absorbing without losing identity. To the west, Libyan tribes influenced Egyptian military and ritual practices. Deities like Neith, goddess of war and weaving, gained prominence partly through Libyan connection. Later dynasties of Libyan origin ruled Egypt, adopting its myths while adding their heritage. The system proved resilient, accommodating change while affirming continuity. To the north, Greece looked upon Egypt with fascination. As early as Homer, Egypt was described as land of wonders, wisdom, and healing. Greek travelers visited temples, marveled at pyramids, and wrote of priests with hidden knowledge. They associated Thoth with Hermes, merging them into Hermes Trismegistus, source of philosophy and alchemy. Isis was equated with Demeter, and later worshipped across the Mediterranean as universal mother. Osiris was compared to Dionysus, god of death and rebirth. Egyptian myths thus spread far, shaping Greek thought, and, through it, Western tradition. The Romans inherited this fascination. Cults of Isis thrived in Rome, Pompeii, and beyond, offering hope of salvation and eternal life. Temples dedicated to her stood beside those of Jupiter and Mars. Her image with Horus influenced depictions of Mary and Christ centuries later. Egyptian symbols crossed into new faiths, transformed yet recognizable. The Ankh, Scarab, and Eye endured, carrying meanings into Christian, Islamic, and modern contexts. This diffusion did not erase Egyptian identity. At home, temples continued rituals as always. Pharaohs continued to offer ma'at. Farmers continued to trust the Nile. Even under foreign rule, Egyptians framed events in mythic terms. When invaders came, they were Seth's forces. When Pharaoh triumphed, Horus prevailed. Myth remained the language through which all history was understood. This adaptability was rooted in the nature of myth itself. Egyptian stories were not rigid dogma, but living traditions. They allowed multiple versions, contradictions, and evolutions. Ra could be creator in one story, Ta in another, Adam in a third. Osiris might die in different ways. Horus might appear as child or adult, Seth as villain or ally. Such fluidity reflected life itself, complex, shifting, yet unified by Ma'at. For Egyptians, truth was not in literal detail, but in symbolic meaning. The sun rose each day that was truth. Whether Ra fought Apophis with spear or spell mattered less than the certainty of victory. Osiris resurrected. That was truth. How Seth killed him, whether by coffin or dismemberment, was secondary. Myths conveyed essence, not chronology. This symbolic approach allowed myths to endure and adapt, always relevant, never outdated. The endurance of Egyptian belief was also sustained by its embedding in practice. Festivals, rituals, and art carried myths into daily life. Even if stories shifted, their enactments remained constant. The rising sun, the flooding Nile, the turning stars all reaffirmed myth without words. Children absorbed stories not only by hearing, but by living them, seeing processions, touching amulets, joining festivals. Myth was environment, not lesson. Death rituals especially demonstrated this integration. Every stage of mummification mirrored divine myth. Body preserved like Osiris, organs protected by sons of Horus, heart weighed in Ma'at scales, soul transformed like Ra at dawn. These rituals ensured each person participated in cosmic cycle, not only kings. Eternity was democratized, available to all who lived rightly and prepared carefully. The democratization of afterlife was gradual. In earliest times, only pharaohs were believed to ascend to heaven, becoming stars with Ra. Later, nobles claimed access through pyramid texts inscribed in their tombs. By Middle Kingdom, coffin texts extended this to commoners who could afford inscriptions. By New Kingdom, the Book of the Dead offered guidance to all. Eternity, once royal privilege, became universal hope. This expansion reflected Egypt's evolving vision. All who upheld Ma'at could join the field of reeds. Through these layers of practice, myth, and adaptation, Egypt created one of the most enduring religious systems in history. Its influence stretched across continents and centuries, shaping cultures long after its temples fell silent. Yet its essence remained the same, a vision of life as sacred cycle, death as renewal, and eternity as certainty. Taion contributes to balance. Each soul participates in eternity. The heart of Egyptian spirituality was the concept of harmony. To them, the universe was fragile, always in danger of slipping into Isfet chaos. Only through constant vigilance, ritual, and justice could Ma'at be upheld. This sense of cosmic responsibility gave Egyptian life profound meaning. Pharaoh carried the heaviest share of this burden. His role was not limited to governance or warfare. He was the earthly guarantor of divine order. Each day he performed rituals to feed and clothe the gods in their temples, ensuring their continued favor. In inscriptions, he is shown offering Ma'at itself, represented as a tiny goddess with a feather crown to deities. This act symbolized his promise to uphold balance on behalf of his people. Without him, the link between humanity and divinity would break. But individuals also bore responsibility. Farmers were expected to work honestly, traders to measure fairly, judges to decide impartially, children to respect parents. Every action contributed to balance or imbalance. The belief that one's heart would be weighed after death made morality intensely personal. To lie, cheat, or harm was not only a crime, but a spiritual danger, adding weight to the heart and risking annihilation by Amit. This moral vision was deeply optimistic. Unlike some cultures where gods were distant or hostile, the Egyptians believed the universe favored justice. Those who lived rightly would be rewarded. Those who strayed would simply cease. The field of reeds promised eternal joy, not only for kings, but for all who upheld Ma'at. Equality before judgment gave dignity to commoners as well as elites. The poor man who lived honestly had the same chance at eternity as the noble. Education in this moral order began early. Children learned maxims and wisdom texts that emphasized truth, humility, respect, and kindness. Scribes copied instructions that urged them to avoid arrogance, to honor elders, to act with fairness. Stories illustrated virtues: the clever triumph of Isis, the loyalty of Horus, the justice of Osiris. By shaping young minds, society ensured continuity of Ma'at across generations. Literature reflected this ethos. Tales like The Eloquent Peasant told of a farmer wronged by officials who appealed to justice through eloquent speeches. His persistence moved the authorities, who restored his property. The story reinforced that truth, spoken with courage, could prevail even against power. Wisdom texts like those of Ptahhotep offered practical and ethical guidance. Be humble, listen carefully, act justly, respect all. These writings were both secular and sacred, binding daily conduct to eternal principles. This emphasis on harmony extended beyond humans to the natural world. Animals were seen as companions of gods, cats sacred to Bastet, ibises to Thoth, crocodiles to Sobek, bulls to Apis. To harm them was sacrilege. Temples maintained sacred animals, treating them as living embodiments of divinity. Even the landscape carried sanctity. Deserts were realms of Seth, fertile fields of Osiris, skies of Nut, waters of Nun. To live in Egypt was to live in a sacred geography, where every creature and place had role in the cosmic drama. Art reinforced this worldview through its balance and order. Figures were drawn in profile, yet with frontal eyes, blending perspectives to capture essence rather than moment. Proportions followed strict grids, ensuring harmony. Scenes showed Pharaoh larger than others, symbolizing cosmic role. Gods appeared with animal heads, expressing powers beyond human form. These conventions were not limitations, but affirmations of truth. art depicted eternal reality, not fleeting appearances. Music and dance, too, had sacred dimension. Hymns honored gods. Instruments carried divine resonance. The sistrum, sacred to Hathor, was shaken to drive away evil. Harps and flutes accompanied rituals, filling temples with sound that was itself offering. Dance embodied myth, with movements retelling stories of creation, battle, or renewal. Even entertainment was prayer, blurring line between joy and devotion. In this way, the Egyptian worldview dissolved boundaries. There was no strict division between sacred and secular, natural and supernatural, life and death. All was interwoven, each part sustaining the whole. The gods were present in every act, eternity in every moment, Ma'at in every relationship. This unity gave Egyptians a profound sense of belonging to community, to cosmos, to eternity. It also gave resilience. When hardship struck, famine, flood, invasion, Egyptians trusted in renewal, just as Ra defeated Apophis nightly. Just as Osiris rose from death, so too would order return. This faith sustained them through centuries of change, making their civilization one of the longest lasting in history. Even today, their voice echoes. The pyramids still rise, the Nile still flows, the sun still paints desert skies. Their symbols endure, their myths inspire, their philosophy resonates. They remind us that life can be seen not as accident, but as story, where every action matters, where balance is sacred, where death is not end, but passage. In their vision, we glimpse possibility of harmony with ourselves, with each other, and with the universe. The mythology of Egypt also reveals much about human psychology. It shows how people sought meaning in cycles, how they coped with fear, and how they projected hopes into eternity. By examining their stories, we glimpse universal patterns of thought, shared across cultures and eras. The fear of chaos was one such pattern. For Egyptians, chaos as Fet was not abstract, but real, embodied in deserts, storms, and invasions. It threatened crops, families, and the very rhythm of life. Myths personified this in Apophis, the serpent who attacked Ra each night. The comfort lay in certainty of victory. No matter how fierce the struggle, dawn always came. This narrative reassured Egyptians that disorder was temporary, order eternal. The longing for justice was another. Life was often harsh, marked by inequality and suffering. Yet Egyptian myth promised fairness beyond death. The Hall of Ma'at ensured that no lie, theft, or cruelty escaped judgment. The poorest farmer could find eternity if his heart was true. The wealthiest noble could be destroyed if corrupt. This belief dignified all, giving moral weight to choices and hope for ultimate justice. The desire for renewal also shaped myth. Death was universal, but Egyptians refused to see it as end. In Osiris's resurrection, they saw promise for themselves. In Ra's daily rebirth, they saw proof of cosmic resilience. The field of reeds offered assurance that life's joys, family, food, labor, beauty, were eternal. These stories transformed fear into hope, giving life meaning beyond the grave. Projection of human relationships onto the divine also reveals psychology. The gods quarreled, loved, grieved, and reconciled like humans. Isis wept for Osiris. Horus fought Seth. Ra grew weary with age. By giving divine form to human experiences, Egyptians sanctified their own struggles. Their myths said, "Your love, your grief, your conflict matter. They are part of cosmic story." This made religion intimate, relatable, deeply personal. Myth also legitimized power structures. Pharaoh's authority was framed as divine necessity, his role as Horus incarnate essential for balance. To obey him was to support Ma'at. To rebel was to side with Seth. This gave stability to rule, embedding politics in cosmic order. Yet it also placed responsibility on kings to act justly, for their legitimacy rested on harmony. Myths thus reinforced hierarchy while restraining abuse, at least in ideal. Dreams and magic further reflected psychological needs. Egyptians valued dreams as messages from gods, interpreting them for guidance. Spells and amulets offered control in uncertain world, protection for children, cures for illness, safety in travel. Even if powerless in material sense, they gave comfort and confidence. This reveals universal human desire, to feel agency, to believe one's actions matter against chaos. The visual richness of Egyptian myth also satisfied psychological imagination. Gods with animal heads, monstrous guardians of the underworld, radiant solar barks, all created vivid mental images. These stirred awe and fear, embedding stories deeply in memory. Art, ritual, and narrative work together to engage mind and senses, making belief not only intellectual, but experiential. Community reinforced this psychology. Festivals, rituals, and processions created collective joy and reassurance. To see gods carried through streets, to sing hymns with neighbors, to feast at tombs with family, all affirmed belonging. Religion was not solitary, but communal, weaving individuals into larger story. This social reinforcement strengthened endurance of myth across millennia. In essence, Egyptian mythology reveals a worldview profoundly human and profoundly cosmic. It addressed fears of death and chaos, offered justice and renewal, legitimized authority, and created community. It did so with extraordinary creativity, weaving symbols, rituals, and stories into a seamless vision. That vision endured because it spoke to universal needs, shaping identity not only for Egyptians, but for all who encountered their culture. Modern psychology finds echoes here. The archetypes described by Carl Jung hero, mother, shadow, wise guide, are vividly present in Egyptian myth. Horus is hero, Isis the mother, Seth the shadow, Thoth the wise counselor. These archetypes recur across cultures, suggesting deep structures of human mind. Egyptian myths are early expressions of these patterns, among the oldest mirrors of psyche. This explains their continuing fascination. Even today, people wear ankhs, study hieroglyphs, admire pyramids, and tell stories of mummies and curses. Egypt remains symbol of mystery, wisdom, and eternity. Its myths still whisper to us because they touch timeless truths of fear, hope, justice, and love. The endurance of Egyptian mythology also lay in its adaptability. Over 3,000 years, dynasties changed, foreign rulers came, languages shifted, yet the core of belief persisted. Each generation reshaped myths, but always in ways that affirmed Ma'at and continuity. During the Old Kingdom, Pharaoh was central. He alone ascended to the heavens, joining Ra among the stars. Pyramid texts carved in royal tombs described his journey, his battles with chaos, his eternal reign. The people supported him with labor, building monuments that embodied eternity. Religion then was hierarchical, focused on king as bridge between gods and humanity. In the Middle Kingdom, this exclusivity softened. Coffin texts extended afterlife hope to nobles and commoners who could afford inscriptions. Osiris rose in prominence, offering salvation to all who lived rightly. Myth became more personal, more democratic. The field of reeds was not only for Pharaoh, but for every faithful soul. Religion adapted to broader society, reflecting new values of community and individual worth. The New Kingdom brought further expansion. The Book of the Dead flourished, with spells and illustrations guiding souls through judgment and trials. Temples of Amun, Isis, and other deities grew vast, filled with art and ritual. Pharaohs like Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, and Ramses II shaped religion boldly. Yet even radical changes were absorbed. Akhenaten exalted Aten, the solar disk, above all gods, seeking to unify worship. His reforms collapsed after his death, but elements of his vision lingered, reminding Egyptians that divinity could take new forms. Later periods saw foreign influence: Libyan, Nubian, Persian, Greek, Roman. Yet Egyptian gods endured. Isis became universal mother across the Mediterranean, worshipped in Greece, Rome, and beyond. Serapis, a fusion of Osiris and Greek deities, spread widely. Temples continued rituals, even under Roman rule. Hieroglyphs remained sacred, though fewer could read them. Myths persisted, evolving but never vanishing. This adaptability came from myth's symbolic nature. Since details were fluid, meanings could shift. Ra could merge with Amun to become Amun-Ra, supreme creator. Ptah could be elevated as craftsman god of Memphis. Horus could be child or king, avenger or protector. Each form carried truth, none excluded others. This pluralism gave resilience, allowing religion to embrace diversity without breaking. Even when Christianity spread, many Egyptian ideas found new forms. The image of mother and child in Isis and Horus echoed in Mary and Jesus. Beliefs in judgment, resurrection, and eternal life resonated with Christian teaching. Monks in desert monasteries inherited traditions of asceticism that once honored gods. Though temples closed and hieroglyphs faded, Egypt's spiritual voice continued in new languages. The rediscovery of Egypt in modern times reignited fascination. When Napoleon's scholars recorded ruins, when Champollion deciphered hieroglyphs, when mummies were unwrapped in Victorian salons, Egypt captured imagination anew. Its myths entered novels, films, and art. The curse of the pharaohs, the mystery of pyramids, the allure of Cleopatra, all became part of global culture. Ancient stories found modern life, still resonant after millennia. This endurance reveals something profound. Myths need not be literal to be true. Egyptians knew this instinctively. They told multiple versions, accepted contradictions, emphasized meaning over detail. Their myths were living symbols, renewed with each telling, each ritual, each dawn. That is why they endured, and why they still speak to us today. To listen to them is to hear a worldview of resilience, justice, and renewal. They remind us that chaos is always near, but never final. That truth and balance are worth striving for. That death is not end, but transformation. They offer vision of life as sacred cycle, eternity as certainty, and humanity as participant in cosmic story. In their myths, the Egyptians left us not only history, but wisdom, whispers from the Nile that still flow across time. To walk today among the monuments of Egypt is to feel the weight of this mythology still alive in stone. The pyramids of Giza rise against the horizon, their geometry precise, their presence overwhelming. They are not mere tombs, but statements of eternity, embodying the promise that order endures, that kings live forever, that Ma'at prevails. Each block whispers of labor, devotion, and cosmic purpose. The temples of Karnak and Luxor stretch vast, their columns like forests of stone. Hieroglyphs cover every surface, hymns frozen in time, prayers still echoing. To step through pylons is to pass into myth itself, where gods walk beside mortals, where Pharaoh offers Ma'at endlessly, where creation is renewed with each ritual. The alignment of halls with sun and stars proves they were not random, but carefully placed instruments of harmony. In the Valley of the Kings, tombs descend into earth, walls painted with journeys of Ra, Osiris, and the dead. The Amduat unfolds hour by hour across chambers, guiding Pharaoh through Duat. Colors remain vivid after millennia, testimony to faith that art sustains eternity. To stand in those halls is to glimpse ancient confidence that death is passage, not end. Even lesser monuments carry resonance. Modest tombs with simple carvings, statues of scribes, amulets buried with commoners, all show that eternity was for all. The poorest farmer, if faithful to Ma'at, could join the field of reeds. His tomb might lack grandeur, but his heart could still be lighter than a feather. This democratization of afterlife reveals deep humanism within Egyptian faith. Modern visitors often feel awe, even without full knowledge of myths. Something in the scale, the precision, the symbolism speaks across time. The pyramids inspire questions of meaning. The Sphinx gazes with mystery. The hieroglyphs suggest lost wisdom. Egypt still holds aura of sacredness, even when interpreted through modern eyes. Its mythology, though ancient, still communicates. This continuity shows that myth never truly dies. It transforms, adapts, reappears in new forms. Egyptian stories shaped Greece and Rome, Christianity and Islam, Renaissance magic, and modern fantasy. They live in museums, novels, films, jewelry, tattoos. They remain shorthand for mystery, eternity, and wisdom. The Nile still flows, carrying memory forward. Yet for Egyptians themselves, it was never mystery but truth. They did not see their myths as allegories, but as reality woven into life. Ra did sail each night. Osiris did reign in afterlife. Ma'at did bind cosmos. Their faith gave them strength to endure centuries of change, to build monuments that defy time, to live with confidence in eternity. To study their mythology today is not only to learn history, but to encounter vision of existence. It invites us to see cycles of nature as sacred, to measure our hearts against truth, to live in harmony with balance. It challenges modern fragmentation with ancient unity, reminding us that life, death, and eternity are one story. Perhaps that is Egypt's greatest gift, not monuments or artifacts, but worldview. A reminder that chaos is real but conquerable, that justice is eternal, that death is transition, that eternity is certain. In their myths, we find reflections of our own fears and hopes, given shape by a people who gazed at sun, stars, and river, and saw not accidents, but meaning. The voice of Egypt still whispers through desert winds and temple stones. It tells us to live in Ma'at, to honor truth, to trust in renewal. It invites us to join their eternal cycle, to see ourselves as part of cosmic drama, to believe that nothing ends but all transforms. Their myths are not gone. They live wherever hearts still seek harmony, justice, and eternity. One of the most striking qualities of Egyptian mythology is its ability to unite opposites. Life and death, chaos and order, human and divine, destruction and renewal. All were seen not as contradictions, but as parts of one whole. This worldview created balance, resilience, and a sense of harmony that still fascinates us today. Take death, for example. In many cultures, it is final, feared, or denied. For Egyptians, it was transformation. Osiris was slain, yet he became ruler of the dead, granting life to others. Pharaoh died, yet rose as star or god. Common people passed into Duat, yet could emerge into the field of reeds. Death was doorway, not wall. Mourning was real, but hope was stronger. Tombs were not prisons, but homes of eternity, built with care and love. Chaos, too, was not merely enemy. Seth embodied desert storms and violence, but he also defended Ra against Apophis. Without challenge, order would weaken. Struggle gave meaning to victory. Egyptians acknowledged danger, but integrated it into cosmos. Even Apophis, though always defeated, was necessary adversary, ensuring renewal each dawn. Thus, chaos was respected as much as feared, part of divine drama that made balance possible. The gods themselves embodied duality. Sekhmet destroyed with fire, yet healed with medicine. Hathor laughed with joy, yet wept with sorrow. Ra blazed with power, yet grew weary with age. These contradictions made gods relatable, reflecting complexity of life. Egyptians did not demand perfection, but wholeness. To worship was to embrace totality of existence, light and shadow alike. Even society reflected this unity. Pharaoh was divine yet human, king yet servant of gods. Scribes wielded knowledge, yet obeyed authority. Farmers labored in fields, yet participated in festivals of gods. All roles were sacred, all necessary for balance. Hierarchy existed, but within cosmic order, where each part mattered. The smallest amulet and the grandest temple both served eternity. This vision also fostered profound respect for cycles. Nile flooded and receded. Crops grew and were harvested. Sun rose and set. Stars turned in sky. Each cycle was sacred, reflection of eternal truth. To Egyptians, stability did not mean stasis, but rhythm. Change was not threat, but renewal. Their resilience came from trust in cycles, assurance that what ended would return. Symbols expressed this philosophy. The scarab beetle rolled ball of dung across ground, like sun across sky, embodying rebirth. The Ankh united male and female, life and eternity. The Djed pillar combined strength and stability with memory of Osiris's backbone. Each symbol merged opposites, showing harmony in unity. To carry them was to carry reminder that balance sustained life. Rituals reinforced the same. In temples, priests daily reenacted creation, awakening statues, offering ma'at, renewing cosmos. Festivals dramatized myths of death and rebirth, sorrow and joy, loss and restoration. Even domestic practices, libations, prayers, charms wove opposites into daily life. Religion was not escape, but engagement, aligning human rhythm with cosmic balance. This worldview shaped ethics. To lie, cheat, or harm was to upset balance. To speak truth, act fairly. Show kindness was to sustain ma'at. Morality was not arbitrary, but cosmic necessity. Justice was woven into structure of universe. Each action carried weight, affecting not only society but eternity. This gave dignity to life, meaning to choice, and hope to all. Modern minds still find inspiration in this vision. It speaks to need for integration, not fragmentation. It invites us to embrace complexity, to find harmony in contradiction, to trust in cycles of renewal. It challenges fear of death with promise of transformation, despair of chaos with assurance of order, isolation of individualism with community of cosmos. The Egyptians did not see themselves as separate from divine, but as participants in eternal story. Their myths gave them identity, resilience, and hope. And in their monuments, art, and texts, they left us invitation to share in that vision. To see sun rise, river flow, stars turn, is to glimpse what they saw. Eternity alive in every moment. The mythology of Egypt also reveals how memory itself was sacred. To be remembered was to live. To be forgotten was to die a second death. This conviction shaped everything from monumental architecture to humble offerings, binding society together across generations. Names carried special power. To inscribe a name was to anchor existence. To speak, it was to renew life. Tomb inscriptions begged visitors, "Say my name, that I may live." Families returned to graves with offerings, calling on ancestors aloud. Each word was prayer, each memory an act of preservation. Oblivion was greatest fear, remembrance, greatest gift. Monuments embodied this pursuit of immortality. Pyramids, temples, and statues proclaimed names of kings, ensuring they would echo through millennia. Even smaller stelae and coffins carried inscriptions, securing eternity for commoners. Hieroglyphs were carved deeply, filled with color, designed to endure. To erase a name was ultimate punishment, a spiritual execution. Damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, was dreaded more than death itself. This focus on memory shaped art and literature. Wall scenes depicted not only myth, but daily life: fishing, farming, banqueting, playing games. These were not records of past, but blueprints for eternity. To carve image of baking bread was to ensure bread forever. To paint musicians was to guarantee music eternally. Art was not nostalgia, but promise, preserving joy of life beyond death. Texts likewise sustained eternity. Pyramid texts, coffin texts, and Book of the Dead contained spells to guide souls, but also affirmed memory of the deceased. Their names, titles, and prayers were written alongside sacred formulas. Literature, like love poems, wisdom texts, and tales, carried values and emotions across generations. Each copy renewed authors' memory, ensuring their words lived. Communal rituals reinforced this culture of remembrance. During the beautiful Feast of the Valley, families visited tombs, bringing food and flowers, feasting with ancestors. They laughed, wept, and prayed together, reaffirming bond between living and dead. In these moments, memory was collective, shared across generations, sustaining not only individuals, but community identity. Pharaohs also engaged in acts of remembrance. They restored temples of predecessors, inscribed hymns honoring ancestors, traced lineage to divine origins. By linking themselves to past, they legitimized present. Yet they also sometimes sought to erase rivals. Hatshepsut's images were defaced, Akhenaten's name chiseled away. These acts reveal power of memory, its preservation blessed, its destruction cursed. The sacredness of memory extended to gods themselves. Myths emphasized that speaking names of deities granted power. Isis gained supremacy by learning Ra's secret name, forcing him to yield authority. To know a god's true name was to share essence, to bind divinity to will. This belief reflected broader conviction that memory and speech shaped reality. Even architecture embodied remembrance. Temples were inscribed not only with prayers, but with records of festivals, battles, and deeds. These were not mere history, but sacred memory, ensuring events echoed eternally. Columns bore names of kings, ceilings, stars of heavens, floors, waters of creation. Every surface was memory in stone. This culture of remembrance created continuity. Egyptians saw themselves as links in unbroken chain, each generation sustaining those before and preparing for those after. Memory bound them not only to family, but to nation, cosmos, and eternity. Forgetting was collapse. Remembering was renewal. Modern fascination with Egypt reflects this same principle. We remember them, and in doing so, we keep their spirit alive. Each time we speak names of Ra, Isis, or Osiris, we echo ancient prayers. Each time we gaze at pyramids, we renew their purpose. Egypt succeeded. Its memory has endured, carried not only by stone, but by story. The legacy of Egyptian mythology is not confined to the past. It continues to shape imagination and culture today. Its influence appears in religion, philosophy, art, and even popular entertainment, proving its timeless resonance. In religion, many Egyptian ideas echoed into later faiths: the judgment of the soul, resurrection after death, eternal paradise. these found parallels in Christianity and Islam. The image of mother and child in Isis and Horus influenced depictions of Mary and Jesus. Monastic traditions in the deserts of Egypt carried echoes of earlier ascetic practices dedicated to gods. Concepts of divine justice, moral accountability, and eternal life remained central, reshaped but recognizable. In philosophy, Egypt inspired Greeks and Romans. Plato and Pythagoras were said to have studied with Egyptian priests, learning about immortality of soul and harmony of cosmos. Hermetic writings, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, combined Thoth's wisdom with Greek thought, shaping Western esotericism. Alchemy, astrology, and mystical traditions drew heavily from Egyptian symbolism, carrying myths into medieval and Renaissance Europe. In art, Egyptian imagery remains powerful. Obelisks stand in Rome, Paris, London, and Washington, carrying solar symbolism across continents. Museums display statues, papyri, and jewelry, inspiring artists and writers. Painters of the 19th century depicted scenes of temples and deserts, fueling fascination with exotic Egypt. Today, films, books, and games reimagine mummies, pyramids, and gods, keeping mythology alive in popular culture. Even language carries echoes. Words like pyramid, sphinx, and pharaoh evoke mystery and power. Symbols like the Ankh appear in jewelry and tattoos, representing eternal life. The Eye of Horus is worn as charm of protection. These images retain meaning, connecting modern lives with ancient belief. Psychologically, Egyptian mythology continues to resonate because it addresses universal human concerns: fear of death, longing for justice, hope for renewal. It offers frameworks for meaning, assuring that chaos is temporary, order eternal, life continuous. Its archetypes, hero, mother, shadow, wise guide, speak to deep structures of human mind, ensuring myths remain relevant. Academically, Egypt remains a field of endless discovery. Archaeologists uncover tombs, decipher texts, restore temples. Each find reveals more about beliefs, rituals, and daily life. Scholars debate interpretations, but all agree on richness of mythology. Its complexity defies simple summary, offering layers of meaning to explore. Spiritually, some today draw inspiration from Egyptian gods, reviving worship in modern contexts. Neo-pagan movements honor Isis, Ra, and Anubis, adapting rituals to contemporary life. For them, Egypt offers living connection to ancient wisdom, a path to balance and renewal. Even those outside such movements find inspiration in symbolism of Ma'at, scarab, or Ankh, using them as guides for harmony and justice. Ultimately, the endurance of Egyptian mythology shows power of story. Myths need not be literal to be true. They carry truths of meaning, not fact. Egyptians understood this, telling multiple versions, embracing contradictions, emphasizing essence over detail. Their myths lived because they spoke to heart, not only to mind. As long as humanity seeks meaning, Egypt's voice will endure. The Nile still flows, pyramids still rise, stars still turn above desert. Their stories remain carved in stone, painted on walls, written in papyri, whispered in memory. Each retelling renews them, each remembrance sustains them. Egypt achieved what it sought: eternity. And so, to listen to Egyptian mythology is to join timeless conversation. It invites us to live in harmony, to honor truth, to trust in renewal. It tells us that life is cycle, death is passage, eternity is certainty. It shows us that we, too, are part of cosmic story, bound by balance, remembered through time. Its voice is ancient yet eternal, still speaking through winds of desert, still flowing in waters of Nile, still glowing in rising sun.